comic book fans. This is your host, Travis Collins, aka Duck Punch. And yes, it is late, but I am a man of my word, and I am back for another episode of Duck Punch Comics. These are 4 more of the books that came out on September 1st, 2010, and today, or tonight, or is it going to be this morning? I'm not quite sure how that works out, but anyway, in this episode we're looking at Hawkeye and Mockingbird number 4, Stumptown number 4, Scarlet number 2, and Green Hornet number 7. Alright, like we always do around here, we jump right to the reviews with Hawkeye and Mockingbird number 4, written by Jim McCann with art by David Lopez. You know, there are some books that can tell a story that is both moving and exciting all at the same time. There are some books that can draw you into the story and leave you just begging for more. And then there are books like this, which try really, really hard to be either of the first 2 categories I just mentioned, and God bless them, they fail all day long. Now, picking up from the end of last issue, Hawkeye, Mockingbird, and Dominic Fortune survive their encounter with Crossfire and Phantom Rider and prepare to take the fight to their attackers. This, of course, succeeds in royally pissing off the 2 villains, but our heroes have a major surprise of their own that cuts away to the last issue of the story arc. Now, here's my thing. The biggest problem I have with this whole title is that everything feels like one long inside joke, or like a series of, wink wink, nudge nudge references to old anecdotes, rather than a fresh new story. I started picking this up thinking it would be a companion to the Avengers, but I've been so lost for about half the story that by issue 3, I just stopped caring. I mean, everything was either a reference to West Coast Avengers, or to Thunderbolts, or to the Hawkeye series, that, it's just more trouble than it's worth to keep up with. Now, Lopez is decent enough as an artist. I'm just not crazy with this thing he does that everyone pretty much has to glow against a black background. It's a minor complaint, and probably is just because I'm irritated with this book that I'm pointing it out, but there you go. Bottom line, this book has really just lost me. If I have to do a Wikipedia search every time I open a new issue of this comic, just to keep up with things, there is a problem. So there you go. Next, from Oni Press, Stumptown number 4, written by Greg Rucka, and artwork by Matthew Southworth. Now, I had totally forgotten that this book was even coming out, but I'm really glad that they had it for me at my store, because the conclusion of this story was one of the highlights of the week. Now, this issue concludes the story of private investigator Dex Perios' search for a missing young woman who had gotten mixed up with a powerful gang on the West Coast. Perios devises a really crazy scheme to blackmail the gang's head honcho into putting everything on the table, along with the girl, and succeeds in pulling them into a confrontation, which yields all sorts of interesting and ultimately satisfying answers. Now, to say that Greg Rucka is one of my favorite writers would be a stretch, but to say that he's not capable of writing some damn fine comics is not. This is a little different from the things I normally like, because it falls more into the crime comics genre. But with an unlikely antagonist like Dex, and an unusual setting, in this case Portland, Oregon, Rucka succeeded in really grabbing my attention. This was a lot of fun. Now, Southworth's art style really fits this book. I honestly can't think of anyone else that would have worked for this book. Great stuff. If you're in the mood for something that's a little bit different, and a lot grittier than the capes and tights crowd of most comics, then this 4-part story just might be for you. It's a lot of fun, and I say that as someone who hates comics like this. Definitely give this a shot. Speaking of things that I don't normally like, and there are books that I forgot about, Scarlet number 2 from Icon comics, written by Brian Michael Bendis, who you may have heard of, did a couple of Avengers books here and there, and artwork by Alex Maleev. Scarlet is back here for a second issue, and this continues to be one of the most intriguing and unorthodox titles out there. This character, Scarlet, is continuing her narration of the events that have led to her being the revolutionary pseudo-anarchist that we saw at the beginning of the first issue, with her stalking the men responsible for her coma and the death of her boyfriend. Things get really intense really quickly, and the reader gets dragged along for a downward spiral that ends with a loud bang and the promise of more to come. Now, say what you will about Bendis' superhero stuff, you can't really complain about anything in his writing here. Now, he's continuing to use the break the fourth wall method of narration. This is where the narrator is the main character, and he or she is talking directly to the reader. The reader is being addressed directly. But here, we are introduced to a new twist. Scarlet, the narrator, the main character, may not be all that trustworthy. Some of the events seem out of order. Her actions are way less than saintly. While we may empathize with what brought her to this point, the reader is left questioning whether or not they can really believe everything she is saying about what she is doing. It's outstandingly unique and fresh, and deserves all sorts of accolades. Now, Maleev, the artist, is probably one of the best artists out there, and might be my second or third favorite, right up there with Glass or Bianchi. This is stunning to look at. Again, this is a different book than what I normally get, but it's definitely worth it. At only the second issue, this is really easy to get into, and it is worth it. So there you go, guys. Last up, from Dynamite Comics, Green Hornet number 7, written by Kevin Smith, and art by Jonathan Lau. Returning back to your regularly scheduled superhero stories, this book has been surprising in its quality, despite my expectations of absolutely hating it. Britt Reed, the son of the original Green Hornet and the heir in the new Green Hornet, continues his war on crime within Century City, while at the same time trying to get the attention of the Black Hornet, the man who murdered his father. His plan succeeds when, at a big gala dinner, his elusive enemy finally reveals himself, and the first face-to-face battle between the Hornets gets set to go in next issue. Now, Kevin Smith is a pretty polarizing figure in pop culture, especially among comic fans, but he's really doing a solid job here. This isn't innovative or landmark or anything like that, but this is very old-fashioned comic book goodness. He's telling a story about an essentially a Batman character with a slightly different modus operandi and a much scarier sidekick than any Robin. Lau is another one of those artists that I would keep an eye on. I could see him going places. If you're looking for something with zero brain requirements to read and is fun for a chuckle, this is definitely a good book to give a look at. Plus, there's a movie coming out next year that's sort of based on this, a little bit. So there's no reason not to give this a check out. So there you go, guys. 4 books, most of them a little bit different than what I normally get. Hopefully I'll be back tomorrow night. I've got to work a double tomorrow, so there's a chance I might not be around. I promise I'm going to try. As always, leave comments, let me know what you thought. And I will talk to you guys later. Have a good evening /day/whatever.